Hi everyone, this is Sarah, your Staff Development Coordinator at Southgate, and I'm just jumping on here to review some things about the SBAR and the LTC infection control forms. Over the last few months, I've noticed that we have gone down in our documentation with the SBAR for changes in condition. I'm not sure why this is. I do want to review what the importance of that form is. And then the LTC infection control form, I always get a lot of questions about. So before we proceed, let's watch the process video that Sarah Arnold created in PowerChart so that we're all on the same page and we know how to initiate the SBAR and complete that form.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to complete an SBAR. An SBAR should be completed with any change of condition. The first thing that you want to do is go to Interactive View so you can document your assessment. I've already documented mine. My patient had a respiratory change of condition, so I documented my vital signs, and then I documented in respiratory, and there's my assessment. After you finish your assessment, you want to go to your ad hoc folder on your toolbar. These are your as-needed forms. Here I'm going to select SNF SBAR and then chart. The SBAR is going to pre-populate with information. It is also going to help you write a progress note. Every form that we fill out converts to a progress note. This first tab for COVID-19 symptom monitoring is going to display anything that has already been documented that is a symptom of COVID. It's just giving you information so that you can review and think, is my patient possibly dealing with COVID? I'm going to click on vital signs because my patient was running a fever and I want to make sure that this information shows up in my final note. I then want to click on the situation or the system that is involved. In this case, it's respiratory. My respiratory assessment that I just documented shows up here at the top. There's no need for me to document anything else because my assessment is all here. If I did forget to document something, I could select a new respiratory evaluation, yes, and I can add information from down below. At this point, I would call the physician and I would tell the physician what my assessment is. Then I would go to B for background, and here is where I can tell the physician what medications my patient is currently on. I also can tell them what allergies they have. Next, I would click on A for appearance. If you need to make a short narrative, you can do that here, but you do not have to. Then I would go to date and time attending notified, and I'm going to put in the name of the doctor or the nurse practitioner that I spoke to. Then I would go to R for response. Here I can select what the physician ordered. If I want to be specific, I can use the other option and enter specifically what labs, x-rays, or other medications were ordered. Then you have your reminder to notify the family. Our policy states that we will notify doctor and family of all changes of condition. Make sure when you enter the family member, you enter their name, not just their relationship. When you're finished, you can hit the green check mark to sign your form. Again, do not click on every tab of this form. When you're finished, you can find your form in Evaluations and Forms, SNF SBAR. If your SNF SBAR does not appear when you click on Evaluations and Forms, make sure you refresh your screen.
Now that we're all on the same page about how to create the SBAR, remember the importance of why we're doing this. The SBAR is going to tell people coming behind us whether or not we notified the physician. If we haven't notified the responsible party yet, say we haven't been able to get a hold of a person, the nurse coming behind us can right-click and modify the form and add more information. The SBAR is also a record of all the data that we gathered prior to calling the doctor, and it puts your assessment into a detailed progress note. Next, let's look at the LTC infection control form and how we're supposed to be documenting in PowerChart.
In this video, we're going to talk about the infection control LTC form. Whenever you put in an antibiotic order for a patient, the computer is automatically going to fire a task for the infection control LTC form to be completed. So after you put in your antibiotic order, if you go to treatments and tasks here on the left under your menu, you will see infection control LTC. I put in an order for our patient to start Cipro for a UTI. I come to treatments and tasks and I open this form. The first tab is going to be infectious disease exposure. You don't have to do anything here. It's just going to pre-populate with information. You're going to click on the third tab, which is diagnostics. Here I'm going to scroll down until I see the section diagnostic procedures. I would select urine analysis. Then next to culture number 1, I'm going to click on the first column, culture source, and this is where I would select urine culture. I say OK and go to the next column for culture results. Here is where I'm going to select what organism. Klebsiella, if you have more than one, you can also select multiple organisms. Then I select OK. I go to the next column, which is date the culture results were received, today. And then I go to antibiotic ordered, and I just type in my antibiotic and the dosage. The next column is going to be antibiotic start date, which is today. And then you have a comment section if you would need it. Because this form is going to fire when any antibiotic is entered, if your patient is started on an antibiotic in the hospital and admits to us still on that antibiotic, you will still have to fill this form out, and you will still need to be able to gather this information from the hospital record. Typically, if you look at the H&P, their progress notes, and their labs, you will be able to find this information to fill this form out. Then I'm going to go to the tab on the left that coincides with the infection that I have. So here I would go to genitourinary. Any pre-populated information would show up here. If you need to add urinary symptoms, you can do so down below. And if they have any urinary elimination devices, you could select that here too. Then you're going to go to the one that has the red asterisk, and it says outcome and team review notes. Here is a text box where you can enter any information that you haven't already said. And then you need to select something in the mandatory field, either non-nosocomial, meaning it was acquired outside of our facility, or nosocomial, meaning it was acquired in our facility. If the infection was nosocomial, acquired in our facility, then you must also go to the McGear criteria tab. The McGear criteria is to help us differentiate if an infection is a true infection or not. So for instance, here we would do urinary tract infection. But just so that you know, if you scroll down, you will see other types of infections as well. Since our patient has a urinary tract infection, I'm going to select yes. Then I need to say, does my patient have an indwelling catheter or no indwelling catheter? If they don't have an indwelling catheter, then I need to be able to select 2 of these items in order for my patient's infection to be considered a true infection. If I am able to select 2 of them, then my patient does have an infection. If they had an indwelling catheter, I would only be required to select 1 of the following. Once you have made your selections, then you are finished with your form and you can sign it with the green check mark.
Okay, with the infection control LTC form, there are different times where you might be initiating this. One of the times might be when you have an admission and you're putting in an antibiotic order. I've noticed that on our admissions, we don't always know why the patient is on an antibiotic. If you're getting a report from the hospital and they're telling you about the patient, can you please ask them if they're on an antibiotic or if they have an infection, what type of infection it is? Then when you put in the order, you can put in the indication, the type of infection. You should also be putting in any signs and symptoms that the resident had prior to being on that antibiotic. If you're filling out the infection control LTC form because you have a resident who is developing an infection or you believe they're developing an infection and you've gotten a UA or a chest x-ray order, fill in as many of the parts of that form that you can. So signs and symptoms that that resident is experiencing. Yes, it does feel a little bit like double the work because you're already filling out the SBAR. Let's say you forgot to fill out the infection control LTC form because it doesn't automatically pop up until you've put in an antibiotic order. As long as you filled out the SBAR with the signs and symptoms, I can, as your infection preventionist, fill out a lot of the infection control LTC form. But let's say you're the nurse who got the antibiotic order, and now you have to fill out the infection control LTC form from scratch. If you don't have anything to go by and you don't know the resident from the prior days, then you won't know what signs and symptoms they had leading up to the antibiotic. So it puts you as the nurse at a disadvantage for being able to complete that documentation. So please think of your fellow coworkers coming behind you who are trying to document on a resident's infection. Remember too that this form has the bacteria that were cultured, and it's a record of any resistant bacteria that we may have in our building. You only need one of these forms per infection, so please initiate it if your resident is starting to develop an infection and you've ordered a chest x-ray or a UA. But if it's not already initiated, it will automatically initiate when the antibiotic order is made. Please fill it out. Don't just click non-nosocomial or nosocomial. You need to fill out the signs and symptoms and the culture results, please. Thank you.